A fragile ceasefire in Gaza and Israel's posturing on the West Bank is making Donald Trump extremely impatient. Even though the US president has explicitly said he will not allow Israel to annex parts of the West Bank, he even sent two of his emissaries, Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, to rein in Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu, too, has been at pains to explain that this procedural vote that was brought forward before the Israeli parliament did not have his government's endorsement. Is this one of the most complex and tricky moments in US-Israel relations? In fact, the opposition is hitting back at Netanyahu, saying that this is not babysitting, this is Bibi-sitting that America and the Trump administration are doing. I dig a little deeper.
Don't worry about the West Bank. Israel's not going to do anything with the West Bank, okay?
The Trump administration has made one thing clear. Any Israeli attempt to annex parts of the occupied West Bank will not be tolerated. US President Donald Trump drove that point home in an interview with the Time magazine published this week. It won't happen because I gave my word to Arab countries. That's how the president said, and he went on to add that the West Bank annexation, if it happened, then Israel would lose all of the support that it gets from the United States.
I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. No, I will not allow it. It's not going to happen.
Did you speak with Netanyahu about this?
Yeah, but I'm not going to allow it. Whether I spoke to him or not, I did. But I'm not allowing Israel to annex the West Bank. There's been enough. It's time to stop now, okay?
The day before the Trump interview came out, the Israeli Knesset, or the Israeli parliament, passed two largely symbolic votes in favor of annexing the West Bank. This is a territory which much of the world envisions as the very core of a future Palestinian state. If Israel were to annex the West Bank, then that is the end of a two-state solution. The United States is Israel's most important ally, and the preliminary votes in the Israeli parliament clearly raised the hackles of President Trump and his administration folks. In fact, Vice President J.D. Vance, who wrapped up a two-day visit to Israel, vented his anger at this vote in the Israeli parliament. He said that if this was a political stunt, then it was a stupid one to do.
What I would say to that is when I asked about it, somebody told me that it was a political stunt, that it had no practical significance, it was purely symbolic. I mean, look, if it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel.
The votes in the Israeli parliament happened on Wednesday. That's the same day that Vance arrived in Israel. The messages from Trump and Vance left Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu scrambling to distance himself from this parliamentary vote. So much so, Netanyahu's office had to put out a clarification in which it stressed about how a large majority of his party, the Likud party, and his right-wing coalitioners had not voted in favor of this West Bank bill. These bills, put forth on Wednesday by a couple of right-wing members of the parliamentary opposition, were largely symbolic. And in fact, if they have to pass, they would need substantially higher number of votes from both Netanyahu's party as well as his coalition partners. And there is much more legislative work that needs to be done before this becomes a law. The political maneuvering around these bills came at a sensitive time amidst a series of visits to Israel by top American officials. They were all there to shore up the fragile Gaza ceasefire, which came into effect barely a couple of weeks ago, to end the two-year-long war. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who also visited Israel this week, he told reporters that the annexation of the West Bank was not something that President Trump would be supportive of. Such moves could potentially endanger the Gaza ceasefire.
That's a vote in the Knesset, but obviously I think the president's made clear that's not something we'd be supportive of right now, and we think it's even threatening to the peace deal. So they're a democracy, they're going to have their votes, people are going to take these positions, but at this time it's something that we think it might be counterproductive.
The Trump administration's plan for ending the war in Gaza include an eventual credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and eventually Palestinian statehood. Benjamin Netanyahu opposes the establishment of a Palestinian state, but he came out forcefully against the vote that happened in the parliament, which brought American pressure on his government. Without the support of the conservative Likud party, which is Netanyahu's ruling party, he said that these bills are unlikely to go anywhere. Netanyahu leads the most right-wing and religiously conservative coalition in the history of Israel. Key members of his coalition want to annex large parts of the West Bank. Some members of the ultranationalist parties, which help make up this coalition and support Netanyahu's government, have voted for the annexation bills. Most of the world views Jewish settlements in the West Bank as a violation of international law. The hardline opposition members who presented these bills have their own beef against Netanyahu, and other centrist members of the opposition simply exploited the votes to embarrass the Prime Minister and to expose splits within his coalition. Adding to the sense of political chaos in Israel, and that too 2 weeks after this ceasefire came into effect, Bezalel Smotrich, who is Israel's far-right finance minister and a staunch advocate of the annexation of West Bank, insulted Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are an American ally, a regional powerhouse, and a country that both Trump and Netanyahu have long been wooing to normalize relations with Israel. In fact, had the war not happened, the next logical step in the Abraham Accords would have been Saudi-Israel normalizing their ties. But that did not happen because of the Gaza war. Smotrich basically said at a conference on Thursday, addressing Saudi Arabia, saying, "Keep riding your camels in the sands of the Saudi desert." That was, of course, as expected, did not go down well with the Saudis. They took it as an insult. Smotrich later had to post a video on social media expressing regret. The back-to-back visits by J.D. Vance and then by Marco Rubio, and of course, both Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were also in Israel this week. All of this underscores the Trump administration's very keen interest in preserving the ceasefire. There was concern in the Trump cabinet that Netanyahu might actually vacate the deal, that he'll walk out of this deal. Both Israel and Hamas have fired and killed in recent days, exposing the shaky nature of this truce. The ceasefire agreement that went into effect earlier this month led to an Israeli military pullback within Gaza. It was also based on Hamas releasing the last of the 20 Israeli hostages who were alive in exchange for almost 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. The dead bodies of the remaining 20-odd are still in the process of being completed, and the holdup seems to be the firing that happened on both sides over the weekend, which has led many to ask a fundamental question: how long will the ceasefire last?